I've always prided myself on knowing the small details about Linda. After 30 years of marriage, I figured that's what love is, knowing she takes her coffee with exactly one sugar, that she sneezes twice in a row when dust hits her nose, and that she wears a size 6.5 shoe. Always has. For the last 2 decades at Nelson Construction, I've built other people's dreams, while Linda kept our books balanced as the accountant she's been since we got married. Our routine was comfortable, if not exciting. Each morning before work, I'd make her coffee while she got dressed. Every Friday, I'd bring home Chinese takeout, and twice a year, I'd surprise her with a new pair of comfortable flats. "Ron, you know me so well," she'd say, that small smile lighting up her face as she tried them on. I never got it wrong. She used to joke about other women and their obsession with high heels. "I don't understand how anyone walks in those torture devices," she'd laugh while we watched women tottering down the street. "Give me comfort over fashion any day." And I loved that about her. Practical, sensible Linda. My Linda. I never thought much about those comments until last Tuesday. I was looking for my work gloves in the bedroom when I spotted a shoebox sitting at an odd angle on the floor near her side of the closet. It looked out of place in our usually tidy room, like it had been hastily shoved there. I wouldn't have given it a second thought if not for the store name embossed on the lid, Lavish Steps. The kind of boutique Linda always called ridiculously overpriced. I'm not the snooping type. Never have been. Linda and I have always had our own spaces, our own little corners of privacy in our shared life. But something about that box just sitting there felt wrong, like a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit. I remember hesitating, my hand hovering over the lid, thinking I should just put it back and forget about it. But 30 years of construction work has taught me that when something doesn't look right, you better check it out before the whole structure comes crashing down. So I lifted the lid, and that's when my world started to crack. Inside were red stiletto heels, the kind Linda had always dismissed as impractical, the kind she'd never wear, and right there printed clearly on the inside of the box, size 9. Such a small detail, 2.5 sizes too big, and just like that, my comfortable life developed its first hairline fracture. I stood there, frozen, staring at those red shoes like they were some alien object that had materialized in our bedroom. My mind raced through logical explanations. Maybe they were a gift for someone? Linda's niece Emily was getting married in August, but Emily was petite. No way she wore a size 9. "Hey, have you seen my—" Linda's voice cut through my thoughts as she appeared in the doorway. She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes darting from my face to the open shoebox in my hands. For just a split second, something flashed across her features. Panic? Guilt? Whatever it was, it vanished quickly, replaced by a casual smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, those. They're for Carol at work." She walked over and took the box from my hands. Her birthday's next week. The girls at the office pitched in. Carol. I racked my brain. Linda had mentioned a Carol before, but I couldn't picture her. Carol wears a size 9? Mm-hmm. Linda nodded, tucking the box under her arm. She's tall. I should have left it there, should have nodded and gone back to looking for my gloves, but 30 years of knowing someone gives you a sixth sense for when something's off. "Since when does Carol like heels? I thought you said she had foot problems. Plantar something." Linda's smile tightened just slightly. "Plantar fasciitis. She's better now. Physical therapy worked wonders." She turned to leave, then stopped. "What were you looking for?" "My work gloves." "Check the garage toolbox. That's where you put them last time." She was right. That's exactly where I'd find them. Linda was always right about those kinds of details, just like I was right about her shoe size. That night at dinner, I watched her more carefully than I had in years. Linda chatted about her day, about the neighbor's new landscaping, about maybe taking a weekend trip to visit her sister next month. All normal, all routine. but I kept seeing that flash in her eyes when she'd caught me with the shoebox. After 30 years, you develop a language beyond words. Linda's tells were subtle, but they were there. The way she pushed her food around more than eating it, how she filled silences with unnecessary details about her day, the extra glass of wine she poured herself. Something was definitely wrong, and now that I'd seen that first crack, I couldn't stop looking for others. I spent the next 2 days in a fog. At work, I almost nailed my thumb twice while distracted by thoughts of those damn red shoes. Dave, my foreman, noticed something was off. "You all right, Ron? You seem like you're somewhere else today." "Just tired," I lied. I couldn't exactly tell him I was obsessing over women's footwear. That evening, I took the trash out as usual. The garbage truck would come in the morning. As I was tying up the kitchen bag, something caught my eye, a crumpled receipt, partially visible among coffee grounds and empty yogurt containers. I normally wouldn't think twice about trash, but the logo at the top matched the one on that shoebox. Lavish Steps. I fished it out, wiping coffee grounds from the paper. The date showed 3 days ago, Tuesday. I'd been on site at the Miller project that whole day. 3 items listed, a blouse, a scarf, and those red shoes, all charged to Linda's card. The pickup location was at Westfield Mall, clear across town from Linda's office. Linda had told me she was working late Tuesday, said they had an audit coming up. I stared at that receipt a long time, standing there in our kitchen with garbage juice dripping onto the floor. The evidence was right in my hand, but my brain refused to process what it meant. "What are you doing?" Linda's voice made me jump. She stood in the doorway, head tilted, watching me. I crumpled the receipt in my fist, just making sure I got all the trash. She lingered a moment too long, her eyes flickering to my closed hand. "You're getting garbage water all over the floor." "Sorry." I dropped the bag in the bin and grabbed a paper towel. As I wiped the floor, I felt her watching me before she finally turned and walked away. That night in bed, I lay awake listening to Linda's breathing, wondering how many other lies were buried in our everyday routine. The weight of 30 years pressed down on me, suffocating. Next to me, Linda's breathing wasn't the deep rhythm of sleep. She was awake too. The next morning, Linda left earlier than usual. "Breakfast meeting," she said, barely making eye contact. Once the front door closed, I sat at our kitchen table for a long time, holding my cooling coffee, mind churning. I'd never gone through Linda's things before, but that receipt was burning a hole in my pocket where I'd stashed it. Our bedroom felt different as I stood in the doorway, the intimacy of 30 years now shadowed by doubt. I started with her closet, sliding hangers one by one, nothing unusual, just Linda's sensible work clothes and casual wear. But then I noticed a gap on the back rod, like something had been removed. A few empty hangers clustered together. The dresser drawers revealed nothing. Her jewelry box, all familiar pieces I'd given her over the years. I checked under the bed, behind the headboard, inside the nightstand. In the bathroom, I opened her medicine cabinet. Same old prescription for her occasional migraines. Same multivitamins, same face creams. Then I noticed her travel toiletry bag was missing. Back in the bedroom, I sat on the edge of our bed trying to make sense of it all. Size 9 shoes, a receipt from a mall across town, missing clothes, a travel bag gone. When I went back downstairs, I pulled out my phone and opened our shared location app, something we'd set up years ago when smartphones became a thing. "So we can find each other in an emergency," Linda had said. I'd never checked it before, never needed to. Linda's location showed she was at her office downtown. I stared at the little blue dot, wondering if that's where she really was, wondering who Carol was, and if she really had plantar fasciitis, wondering if those size 9 red heels were actually a birthday gift, wondering why, after 30 years, I suddenly felt like a stranger in my own marriage. That evening, when Linda came home with takeout Chinese food, our Friday tradition, I watched her set the table with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And I knew I'd have to dig deeper, even if I was terrified of what I might find. By Monday morning, I'd convinced myself I was overreacting. 30 years of marriage doesn't unravel over a shoe size. I'd drive myself crazy imagining things. "I'm heading out," Linda called, grabbing her purse. "Don't forget your physical at 4. "You remembered?" I smiled, genuinely surprised. "Of course." She paused at the door. "Should I pick up dinner after work?" "No need, I'll cook tonight." After she left, I tried to shake the suspicions haunting me all weekend. But sitting alone with my thoughts wasn't helping. So I called in sick, something I'd done maybe 3 times in 20 years, and headed to the garage. Busy work would clear my head. That's when I saw Linda's car still parked down the street. She always parked in the driveway. Always. Except today. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys. Following your wife isn't normal behavior, but suspecting your wife isn't normal either. Nothing felt normal anymore. I kept a safe distance behind her sedan. Downtown traffic made it easy to blend in. But Linda didn't turn toward her office. Instead, she headed toward Westfield Mall. My heart pounded as I watched her park and enter the mall's north entrance. I parked on the opposite side, then made my way inside, baseball cap pulled low. I felt ridiculous, a 60-year-old man playing detective. I spotted her at a coffee shop, sitting alone with her laptop, just working remotely. My paranoia was making me crazy. I was about to leave when a man approached her table. Tall, maybe mid-40s, wearing an expensive-looking suit. Linda's face transformed when she saw him, lighting up with a smile I hadn't seen in years. He bent down to kiss her. Not a friendly peck, a lover's kiss. My legs nearly gave out. I ducked behind a pillar, blood rushing in my ears. After 30 seconds that felt like hours, I forced myself to look again. They were holding hands across the table, heads close together, talking intimately. Linda laughed at something he said, touching his face in a gesture so tender it felt like watching something obscene. In our whole marriage, I'd never felt so completely invisible, standing 20 feet away, while my wife caressed another man's face. I took out my phone with shaking hands and snapped a photo, then another. Documentation of the moment my marriage died. I don't remember driving home. Somehow I found myself sitting in our driveway, engine off, staring at nothing. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, loaded with images I couldn't bring myself to look at again. When I finally went inside, I wandered through rooms filled with our life together. Wedding photos on the mantel, the dining table where we'd celebrated 30 Christmases, the couch where we'd watched countless movies, her head on my shoulder. Was any of it real? In the kitchen, I opened a beer, then set it down untouched. I needed clarity, not numbness. I needed to think. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up for dinner. Love you." My hands shook as I typed, "No problem. Love you too." Words that now felt like a foreign language. I spent the afternoon piecing things together. The mall visits, the shoes, the missing clothes. I checked our joint account, finding repeated withdrawals of $200 to $300 over the past several months. Hotel rooms probably. My stomach clenched. At 3:30, I remembered my doctor's appointment. I almost skipped it, but something about maintaining normalcy appealed to me. I needed one thing to be routine when everything else was crumbling. Dr. Matthews asked how I was feeling while checking my blood pressure. "Little stressed lately," I admitted. "Your pressure's up. Everything okay at home?" I almost laughed. Just work stuff. Back home, I sat in our bedroom, staring at Linda's side of the closet. The more I looked, the more I noticed things missing. Not just clothes, but small keepsakes, a jewelry box her mother had given her, the cashmere scarf I'd bought her last Christmas. She wasn't just having an affair, she was preparing to leave. That's when cold clarity washed over me. I'd been so focused on discovering her secret that I hadn't considered what came next. What was I supposed to do with this knowledge? Confront her? Divorce her? Pretend I didn't know? 30 years, half my life. I picked up the beer I'd abandoned earlier and drank it in 3 long swallows. Then I walked to the garage and pulled down the dusty box of tools I hadn't touched in years. I had work to do. The next morning I called Dave and told him I needed another day off. "Everything all right, Ron?" "That's 2 days in a row." "Just some stuff at home that needs fixing," I said. Not exactly a lie. After Linda left, kissing me goodbye like it was any normal day, I got to work. First, I went through her desk. The second drawer had a false bottom, something I'd installed for her years ago to store her grandmother's brooch. Now it held a burner phone and a small notebook. The phone was password protected, but the notebook wasn't. Inside were dates, times, and locations written in Linda's neat handwriting, hotel names, restaurants. The last entry was yesterday's date with WM-Coffee-1030 written beside it. Westfield Mall. At the back of the notebook was a name and address I didn't recognize, along with what looked like an apartment number. Michael Harlow, 1240 Riverside Drive, number 304. I wrote down the information, then carefully replaced everything as I'd found it. Next, I went through her browser history on our shared computer. She'd been sloppy there. Searches for best divorce lawyers and how to divide assets in divorce jumped out at me. One search particularly caught my eye. How to tell husband you're leaving after 30 years? She'd been planning this for months while I remained oblivious, building houses for other people, while my own home crumbled silently around me. I took screenshots, saving them to a folder labeled Taxes 2019. Then I checked our financial accounts. Linda had always handled our money, the perfect arrangement since she was an accountant. Now I understood that arrangement had given her complete control. Over the past year, she'd moved nearly $40,000 from our joint savings to an account I didn't recognize. Small transfers, never more than a few thousand at a time. Money we'd saved for retirement, for our future. A future she was now planning with someone else. I sat back in the chair, suddenly exhausted. The betrayal was so complete, so methodical, it left me breathless. This wasn't just an affair born of boredom or midlife crisis. This was calculated, planned, executed with precision. The woman I'd trusted for 30 years had been systematically preparing to erase me from her life. And she'd almost succeeded. Almost. That night I cooked Linda's favorite meal, herb-roasted chicken with those little potatoes she likes. I opened a bottle of wine, set the table with the good plates we saved for anniversaries. She came home late, looking startled at the candlelit table. "What's all this for?" There was a wariness in her eyes. 30 years, 3 months, and 15 days of marriage, I said, smiling. "Thought we could use a nice dinner." She relaxed slightly, set down her purse. "It smells wonderful." Throughout dinner, I asked about her day. She told me about office politics, client meetings, elaborate fictions delivered between sips of wine. I nodded, asked follow-up questions, played the role of attentive husband. After dinner, she helped clear the table. "That was lovely, Ron." "Thank you." "I've been thinking," I said, refilling her wine glass. "We should take a trip, maybe for our anniversary next month." "A trip?" She looked genuinely confused. "Yeah, someplace nice, maybe that bed and breakfast in Vermont we always talked about." She hesitated. "That sounds wonderful, but I might have a busy period at work coming up." "That's okay. We could go in September instead, or October." I reached across the table for her hand. "I just want us to have something to look forward to." Guilt flickered across her face. She squeezed my hand. "Let me check my schedule." Later, while she showered, I opened her purse. The burner phone was there. 3 missed calls from M. Her key ring included a key I didn't recognize, probably to his apartment. When she emerged from the bathroom, I was sitting on the bed, smiling. I was thinking about that trip, I said. Maybe we could invite your sister and her husband. Maybe. She slipped into bed, keeping a careful distance. We'll see. You're right. Maybe just us would be better. She turned off her lamp. Good night, Ron. Night, Linda. I waited until her breathing deepened into sleep. Then I took her phone from the nightstand, using her finger to unlock it while she slept, a trick I'd read about online. I went through her messages, emails, photos. Nothing incriminating. She was too smart for that. I replaced the phone, then slipped out of bed. In the kitchen, I made a cup of coffee and opened my laptop. I had a plan now. Linda wasn't the only one who could be methodical. After Linda left for work the next morning, I drove to 1240 Riverside Drive. It was a sleek high-rise with a doorman and private parking, the kind of place that cost serious money. Our money, apparently. Apartment 304 would be on the third floor. I sat in my truck across the street, watching residents come and go. Around 9:30, a familiar face emerged. Linda's lover, Michael. He was even better dressed than at the mall, in a tailored suit that probably cost more than I made in 2 weeks. He climbed into a Tesla and drove away. I waited 15 minutes, then approached the building. The doorman looked at my work clothes with barely disguised disdain. I'm here to check the flooring in 304, I said. Mr. Harlow called about some issues. The doorman frowned. I don't have any maintenance requests logged. I shrugged apologetically. Must have gone directly to the building manager. Want me to call her? He waved me through rather than deal with a hassle. 30 years in construction taught me one thing. If you act like you belong somewhere, people rarely question you. Apartment 304's door was sturdy. A good deadbolt would take tools I didn't have. I wasn't here to break in anyway, just to confirm what I already knew. The tenant directory in the lobby listed M. Harlow for 304. On the mailbox, a small label, Michael and Linda Harlow. Linda Harlow, not Linda Bennett. She'd already changed her name in her mind. Back in my truck, I pulled out my phone and looked him up. Michael Harlow, 43, financial advisor with Morgan Stanley. LinkedIn showed an MBA from Wharton, testimonials from wealthy clients. Facebook revealed European vacations, charity galas, wine tastings, a lifestyle I could never provide. I drove to work, mind churning with new information. Dave greeted me with concern. You okay? You look like hell. I'm fine, I lied. Just need to focus on work today. The physical labor helped clear my head. By lunch, I had formulated my plan. Nothing dramatic or violent. I wasn't that type of man. But I would not go quietly. I would not be erased from my own life without a fight. That evening, I withdrew $10,000 from our joint account, less than she'd taken, but enough to get started. I rented a safe deposit box at a bank Linda didn't use and stored the cash there, along with copies of all the evidence I'd gathered. Then I called our financial advisor and scheduled an appointment for the next day. If Linda could be methodical about leaving me, I could be just as methodical about protecting myself. For 3 days, I lived a double life. Going to work, coming home to Linda, eating dinner, watching TV, all while gathering evidence and securing my finances. I spoke with a divorce lawyer during my lunch break. I documented everything. Linda seemed oblivious, perhaps mistaking my calm for ignorance. She continued her charade of normalcy, though I noticed she was on her phone more, always stepping into another room to take calls. On Friday, everything changed. I came home early from work to find Linda packing a weekend bag. Going somewhere? I asked from the doorway. She jumped slightly. Oh, you startled me. Just going to visit my sister for the weekend. Her sister Deb lived in Cincinnati, but the bag on the bed contained those red high heels, size 9. Deb doing okay? I asked casually. She's fine, just lonely since the divorce. I nodded. Give her my best. She zipped up the bag. I'll be back Sunday evening. Don't forget to water the plants. Will do. After she left, I checked her location on our shared app. She wasn't heading toward the airport, but toward Riverside Drive. I'd expected as much. It was time. I packed my own bag with clothes and essentials. Then I took down the shoebox that had started it all, the one with the red high heels, and placed it conspicuously by the front door. Next to it, I positioned a manila envelope containing printouts of everything: the photographs from the mall, bank statements showing the transferred money, screenshots of her divorce research, a picture of the Michael and Linda Harlow mailbox. On top, I placed a note. You forgot these. Size 9. They're not your size. Simple, director, unavoidable. I called a locksmith and had the locks changed, explaining that my wife and I were separating. The sympathy in his eyes was almost unbearable. Then I forwarded all the evidence to my lawyer, as advised. Finally, I sat in my recliner, facing the front door, and waited. According to the location app, Linda was still at Michael's apartment. She'd probably stay the night, but eventually she'd come home for more of her things. The sunset painted the living room gold as I sat motionless, thinking about the 30 years we'd shared. The good times weren't invalidated by her betrayal. They happened. They were real. But that marriage was dead now. All that remained was the formal burial. My phone buzzed. A text from Linda. Having a great time with Deb. Don't wait up tomorrow. Love you. I didn't respond. Some lies don't deserve acknowledgement. The first knock came at 10:37 Sunday morning. I'd been awake for hours, sitting in the kitchen with a cold cup of coffee. The second knock was more insistent. Then came her voice. Ron, are you in there? My key isn't working. I walked slowly to the door, but didn't open it. The locks have been changed, I said through the door. Silence. Then, what? Why would you? Her voice cut off as she must have noticed the shoebox and envelope. Ron, open the door. We need to talk. I think that envelope says everything that needs to be said. Another silence. Longer this time. I imagined her reading through the documents, seeing the evidence of her betrayal laid bare. Ron, please. Her voice had changed, quieter now. Just let me explain. Explain what, Linda? That you've been planning to leave me? That you've been stealing our retirement money? That Michael and Linda Harlow already share a mailbox? It's complicated. No, it's actually very simple. My voice was steady, surprising even me. 30 years together, and you couldn't even tell me to my face. I heard her sigh, then a soft thud as she leaned against the door. I didn't know how to tell you, she said finally. I didn't want to hurt you. So lying for months was your solution? Sneaking around? Taking our money? I was going to tell you after what? After you'd secured your new life? After you'd taken everything you wanted? Another long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was different, resigned but also relieved, like she'd put down a heavy burden. I'm sorry, Ron, I truly am. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. The evidence says otherwise. Can I at least get some of my things? I walked away from the door without answering, back to the kitchen where I poured my cold coffee down the sink. Through the window, I watched her eventually return to her car, envelope and shoebox in hand, phone pressed to her ear, calling Michael, no doubt. As she drove away, something unexpected happened. A weight lifted from my chest, not completely, but enough to take a full breath for the first time in days. She was gone, but somehow I was still here. Linda came back on Tuesday with a moving truck and her lawyer. I'd been expecting this. My own lawyer had advised me to be elsewhere to avoid confrontation. Instead, I sat on the front porch with a beer, watching them pull up. The lawyer approached first, a nervous young man clutching a leather portfolio. Mr. Bennett, I'm Jeffrey Winters, representing Linda Bennett in your separation. We filed a request for temporary distribution of personal property. I took a slow sip of beer. Already spoke to my lawyer. She can take her personal items, Nothing else. He nodded, relief evident. Thank you for your cooperation. Linda didn't look at me as she unlocked the door with the new key the locksmith had provided for legal purposes. She'd dressed carefully, professional, subdued, like she was going to a business meeting instead of dismantling our marriage. 2 movers followed her inside while I remained on the porch. Jeffrey stood awkwardly nearby, occasionally checking his phone. Nice day, I commented. He startled. Yes, very nice. We lapsed back into silence. Inside I could hear furniture being moved, closets opening and closing, the sounds of 3 decades being sorted and divided. After an hour, Linda emerged with a clipboard, checking off items. Your client has been taking money from our accounts for months, I said to Jeffrey. My lawyer has documentation. His expression confirmed he hadn't known. We should discuss this through proper channels, Mr. Bennett. Just making sure you have all the facts. Linda's face tightened, but she said nothing, returning inside. Dave drove by, slowing when he saw the moving truck. He rolled down his window. Everything okay, Ron? I raised my beer in greeting. Getting there. By late afternoon, the truck was loaded with Linda's clothes, her desk, some artwork, and various personal items. She'd taken nothing we'd bought together. My lawyer had been very clear about jointly owned property. Before leaving, she finally approached me, Jeffrey hovering nervously behind her. The divorce papers will be delivered tomorrow, she said quietly. I nodded. I figured. She hesitated, like she wanted to say more. Instead, she turned and walked to her car, not the moving truck, which would go to her new life with Michael. She drove away without looking back. 6 months later, I stood in the freshly painted living room of my new condo. The divorce had been finalized with surprising efficiency. Linda was eager to move on, and I was too tired to fight over material things. My lawyer had recovered most of the missing money, citing financial fraud during marriage. The house had been sold, assets divided. Dave and some guys from work helped me move in last weekend. The place was smaller, closer to downtown, with a view of the river I never thought I'd be able to afford. A fresh start at 58. My phone buzzed with a text from Karen, Dave's sister-in-law, confirming our dinner plans for tomorrow. Nothing serious yet, just 2 people sharing meals and conversation, getting to know each other slowly. She was divorced too, understood the caution that comes with starting over. The doorbell rang. Deb, Linda's sister. We'd stayed in touch despite everything. She'd been horrified by Linda's actions, especially the lies about visiting her. Place looks great, Ron, she said, handing me a housewarming plant. Still getting settled, I replied, leading her to the kitchen where I'd made coffee. Have you heard? She asked, settling at the counter. About? Linda and Michael. It's over already. He was cheating on her with some client. I absorbed this without surprise. That how these stories usually end, isn't it? Deb nodded sadly. She asked about you, wanted to know if you were okay. What did you tell her? The truth? That you're doing better than expected, that you're moving forward. I smiled slightly. Good answer. After Deb left, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset reflect off the river. I thought about those red high heels, size 9, that had revealed the truth. About the tiny detail that had collapsed 30 years of marriage like a house with a faulty foundation. I'd loved Linda, truly and completely, and for most of those 30 years, I believe she loved me too. But people change, or perhaps they reveal who they always were, once you notice the right details. The divorce settlement included a clause preventing Linda from contacting me directly, but last week a package arrived, forwarded through my lawyer. Inside was a small wooden box I'd made for her during our first year together, and a note, "This belongs with you. I'm sorry for everything." I kept the box but threw away the note. Some apologies come too late. Tomorrow, I'd start a new project with Dave's crew. Tonight, I had dinner plans with Karen, and next month, I was taking that trip to Vermont, alone, but not lonely. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was, surprisingly, a life I could embrace.